right, it's Drinks with Dr. Steve and Zeus, right? So I'm having my favorite drink. I'm sitting back. I'm having one drink. Remember, one drink only. I didn't drink a Knickerbocker. It's bourbon with cherry bitters and a white trash maraschino cherry, right? So I covered a video, and here, this is why I do one drink only, because remember, alcohol converts to acetaldehyde that then the liver has to convert into acetate, right? And so in that's the same process that the PUFAs go through that oxidize, and as those fats peroxidize, it's going to create unbound iron, and that's going to oxidize, forming hydroxyl radicals and damaging all-cause cellular metabolism, meaning it's going to cause your all age-related diseases, heart disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes, you name it, right? So that's why you only get one. And one drink, it's actually interesting, if you are on a lower carb diet, the metabolism to burn the alcohol will actually burn more calories than what you're consuming, but that's all you get is one. And you'll probably sleep a little bit better because it's going to increase your GABA. Right? So there's some benefit there with one occasionally here and there. It's not going to hurt you. There's some benefit, especially if you like having a drink every now and then, right? It'll actually benefit you. Some people have a no rule limit, but whatever. They have a rule of none. Abstinence is their rule. But I think there's some argument in that with having one occasionally. So I wanted to cover, I did a video the other day about how emotions affect the liver and insulin resistance. And there's a hierarchy. Number one most important thing is your mind and the way that you think that affects the electron flow. The number two thing still isn't food. The number two thing is going to be your environment, your lighting environment and your electromagnetic field environment. And then number three is going to be your posture and how the electrons can flow through the kundalini up through over the pineal gland. Number four is going to be exercise. And number five is food. But everybody loves to cover the food. And there's a lot of this stuff. Zeus's pillow, right? This is Zeus's pillow. But it also symbolizes what the nutritional information is out there for people, because it is just plain shit. And there's a lot of confusing information out there on how should I eat, what should I eat, when should I eat. And a lot of it's just gobbledygook. It's cool theories, but we have to look at what actually occurs, not look at epidemiological studies, because you can't control people's complete behavior, and you don't know what they're thinking in their mind, because everybody's got a different thing going on. They all got a karmic experience that they're living through in this life, because we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So correlation is not always causation. But if we look at the science of what actually happens with insulin resistance, we can put a better picture together and decide what's the best path for the majority of people. And that's why I look at DNA. That's why I break down people's genetics. And I look at methylation pathways, because it's a key. It's not the end-all be-all, but it's a key. And it tells me what's going on with them emotionally. It tells me what's going on with the person nutritionally, and what we maybe need to make some accommodations for. But we're just going to cover the basics, right? And everybody loves low carb now. It's the craze. And they love the keto and the carnivore. I don't. And they want to cite studies that back up their evidence. And you can basically prove anything with any study you want. You can find a study on it that proves your thesis. But here's the deal: we have to think what's really occurring, because there's also studies that exist out there where they give you aspirin and sugar, high dose sugar and high dose aspirin, reverse diabetes. How does that make any sense from the narrative everybody's telling you? So let's break this thing down. If you have insulin resistance, from a nutritional perspective, even though it's number 5 on the list, we're gonna cover it because everybody loves to talk about food. And here's the deal: fats are a bigger contributor to insulin resistance than carbohydrates, and there's you cannot metabolize fats and carbohydrates both at the same time. It does not work that way. It's one or the other. So if you're gonna do higher fat, you gotta do lower carb. If you're gonna do high carb, you gotta do lower fat. I prefer to do lower fat because the fats oxidize much easier. You don't really have a lot of oxidative damage from consuming carbohydrates. And technically, if you had low enough fat, you could eat a ton of carbs and you probably wouldn't even have a problem. But it's the fat, it's the fatty acid oxidation, the accumulation of the fats and the lipid peroxidation that's actually damaging cellular metabolism and glycolysis, not allowing you to make energy efficiently, because that's what insulin resistance is. You're not able to make energy efficiently. And it's the Randall cycle. The Randall cycle is the fact that you cannot metabolize both at the same time. You can't do high carb and high fat together. You got to go one way or the other. So, in a perfect world, you'd be able to be metabolically flexible. But you may not be able to start out that way. So what you're going to do, since fats oxidize, and you have to remember, low carbohydrate diets are still going to get glucose because it's going to break down protein. Your body's going to release glucagon to break down the protein through gluconeogenesis, which is going to increase cortisol, which is going to increase estrogen, prolactin, and lactate, lower your T3 in your metabolism. You don't make your sex hormones, and you destroy your metabolic health, and your body temperature drops. It's insane. That's what you got when you eat low carbohydrate. So, sugar is medicine to the pancreatic beta cells. And the only reason your blood glucose is lower when you don't consume carbohydrates is because just that fact. You're not eating the carbohydrates. You're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound is what you're doing. You're not really looking at cellular metabolism and how to heal. And so what we want to do is think, right? So we know that polyunsaturated fatty acids lower cholesterol in the short term, and they look better. But the reality is what's happening, they're oxidizing, forming something called peroxynitrate, especially if you have FADS gene. So now you're metabolizing those fats, you're forming peroxynitrate that leads to heart disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, and disrupts glycolysis, and ends up causing cancer and cellular metabolism. The cell has to revert back to using hydrogen for fuel instead of oxygen. And that's not the route we want to go down. So what you're going to have to do is put some work into this to figure it out. And you're going to have to get on chronometer. You're going to have to start counting calories and weighing food and understanding macronutrients, right? When I work with patients on their diet, that's what I do. I get on an Excel sheet, a customized Excel sheet, and I track every little thing. And I look at what's going on. And sometimes it's scary because the people are scared. And I'd say probably 75, 80% of people aren't following it, even when I put it together for them. But, you know, I'm doing my best to help them. I can only do so much, right? And it's about getting an idea, right? Once you've done this for years, you don't need to do it anymore. You can eyeball stuff. You know about how much things weigh and how much you should be eating. And you know where your metabolic rate is at. You can fluctuate the carbs and fats. You can have high carb days and lower carb days. And, you know, it gets easier as you learn, right? And sometimes you just need a coach. But the deal is that since sugar is medicine for the pancreatic beta cells and sugar doesn't cause diabetes, it's fat peroxidation damaging cellular metabolism, not allowing you to utilize the glucose. It's actually causing diabetes and insulin resistance. So what you want to do is keep your fats pretty low, probably about 15 to 20% if you really have poor metabolic health, and then start adding those carbohydrates in. And seeing how much you can handle. You might only be able to start with 100 grams of carbohydrates, and keeping your protein a little bit lower. It just depends on where your metabolic system is at, right? And the way that you figure out where you should start on a minimum basis and then work your way up from there is you take your lean body mass, not your total weight, but your lean body mass that you have, and you multiply it by 10. That's your total calories. So somebody who has 150 pounds of lean mass only eats 1,500 calories a day, and you can start incrementing it, inching it up, look at what happens with your weight on the scale, just 10%. So you go from 1,500 to 1,600 to 1,700 to 1,800, right? And you work your way up to about 3,000 calories. Maximum amount of calories you consume is your lean body mass times 20. So you're between 1,500 and 3,000 calories, right? And 3,000 calories is probably the excess. You probably want to be somewhere in the middle. And so now you know how many calories you consume, and 20% of those should be from fat. And your diet should be, if you're 150 pounds, it should be 1 pound for every pound of lean mass. And you should be getting a lot of that from glycine, proline, which is in collagen. And you should be getting enough calcium in your diet to offset the phosphorus and the protein. So it's not like you're eating a lot of animal meat, right? So, the carnivore people have a problem because you're going to increase your epinephrine. It has methionine, cysteine, and tryptophan that are increasing epinephrine, disrupting glycolysis. Holy shit, the carnivore people are actually causing insulin resistance. But yet you're not eating any carbohydrates. Remember, your body breaks down protein to turn into glucose if you don't consume it. It's protein sparing. That's what carbohydrates are. They demand fuel. Your brain functions on glucose. So, understanding that even saturated fat, talk about polyunsaturated fatty acids and how they oxidize because they don't have hydrogen bonds, so they're unstable and they oxidize very easy. But remember, saturated fat can be too much too. It has palmitic acid in it that can do the same thing as the PUFAs. The same thing as too much alcohol. You getting the picture yet? That everything is balance in life, including the way that you think? Maybe it's finally clicking for you people. You gotta understand it. It's about balance, and it's not about having black and white lines. You have to have flexibility in your metabolic system, and you have to have flexibility in the way that you think, because it's perception. And you can change your cholesterol, and you can change your insulin resistance just with a thought. I worked with a patient a month ago. Ran through her subconscious mind portals in the DNA expression in her lineage from generations ago. And she took her blood glucose, and it was normal. It went from 120 down to 90. In 15 minutes. Because your thoughts are more powerful than the food you eat, but you want to focus only on the food, so I'm focusing on the food. So, understanding that you can get too much saturated fat, you can have too many polyunsaturated fatty acids because they oxidize easier than the saturated fat. The saturated fat has some benefit too from the lipid peroxidation. The vitamin E that's in the saturated fat is PUFA protective. So it stops some of the damaging effects from that. But it doesn't mean you can go overboard on the saturated fat. You still got to stick to 20% and make sure you're getting enough carbohydrates. And then I'd probably start by increasing my carbohydrates more and more and more until you can tolerate it, watching your body weight and your glucose levels. But carbohydrates lower cortisol. Whoa, right? It's like, how can that be? They're bad. Carbohydrates are bad, right? I want to lose weight. Look, you can lose weight and be skinny. And if you look at diabetics, there's such a thing as a skinny diabetic. And because when you're diabetic, your body can start to eat itself. And that's not a spot you want to get into. It's damaging your cell function. It's going to lead to kidney diseases, and it's going to lead to cardiovascular disease, and it's going to lead to cancer. Insulin resistance is just the start. So, just thinking about it, understanding that carbohydrates are important, proteins are important, fats are important, but it's about understanding how they function and work together and what their purposes are. Right? We need fats to make our hormones. We need fats to make up our cell membranes. We need carbohydrates to supply us with energy to spare our protein. And we need proteins to rebuild our cells that are damaged. So there's a function to it, and it's balance, like everything in life. And the best approach for anyone is to look at your macros and weigh your food and see how many calories you're eating, making sure you're getting enough calories, because the calories is just as important as the type of food. and then start with 20% fat, never going over 30% of your total calories. Adding in some carbohydrates more and more at a time until you see that you can't tolerate more, and getting the protein that you need. Not all animal meat. Some of those proteins are going to come from carbohydrates. Some of those proteins are actually going to come from collagen, from organ meat. So I do focus on food, but it is not the number one important thing. It's the hierarchy, and it's about balance. So next time you want to listen to the next guru that's online, you can believe what they're saying and follow it. And then when it doesn't work, you can go back to balance.